Hello. Alright, so for my podcast, for a while, I was thinking I wasn't sure what I wanted to do my podcast on, and I really couldn't think of any cases stuck out for me. So I really just started researching and looking up infamous crimes that happened by where I live, which is in South Jersey, which led me to finding out about this one infamous crime that's not really well known, but it's known a little bit in the criminology circles, which is called the Walk of Death, which happened in Camden in 1949. It really just stuck out to me because I live close to Camden and I've never heard of this case before. I've been there many times. I was born there. My mom used to be a nurse there at Cooper. Um, and my family used to go there like all the time back in the day around this time. Like my grandparents used to go shopping there. They said it was like a great place. Obviously, it's not considered as nice of a place today since it's an area that struggles with a lot of problems like poverty and crime today, which is a real shame, but it's just the way it is. Um, this shooting was considered one of the nation's like earlier shooting rampages that happened, and it was called the Walk of Death. It involved a World War II veteran, Howard Unruh, who shot up the Camden neighborhood with gunfire on the morning of September 6, 1949, killing 13 people in around 20 minutes. Here's some backstory on the shooter, Howard Un- Unruh, before we get into the main story. Alright, before he joined the army, he lived a normal life. He was born on January 20th, 1921, in Camden, where he was raised his entire life. He was a normal kid at the time, going to church and school, and was considered a good kid who more or less kept to himself, and he was also considered a little shy. He had some hobbies like making model trains and stamp collecting, which I guess were fairly common at that time. He went on to graduate from Woodrow Wilson High School and wanted to work for the government after graduation. After high school, he went on to work many blue collar jobs, and everything seemed to be working well, and his future seemed to be very bright. But then he went into the war. This is where learned how to use weaponry and weapons, and he joined the army in 1942. He served in the 342nd Armored Field Artillery and was used as relief in the famous Battle of Bulge. He also served mainly as a tank gunner and received some praises for the work that he did while in the army. But he never was any crazy rank besides. He was always just a private, and he never rose above that rank at any time. The only thing that was considered strange from him at the time in the army was that he kept very specific notes that were extremely detailed on the German soldiers that he killed. He described their corpses in very disturbing details, but he was never diagnosed with any mental illness by the army and was honorably discharged. This was the only strange thing that I found on him at the time. But other than this, he was seemingly perfectly normal. Maybe it was a way for him to cope. I have no idea why he did that. It was a little strange, but that's the only thing I found on him that was odd. But after he got out of the army, his younger brother said he never acted the same that and he never came back the same person that he was before the war, which is a shame and which is fairly common to anybody that fights in wars. Nobody really suspected anything of him. Most people said, quote unquote, that he would never hurt a flea. And after the war, he went to work at Kramer Hill, which is where his mother worked. He struggled to fit back into society, as many do, since after the wars, since he had no friends to talk to and did not have any life goals really. I found many like conflicting ideas about him since people either saw him as a man with a temper who was like at a boiling point ready to explode, and others just saw him as somebody that was completely harmless. So I don't really know what that was all about. I either found one extreme or the other extreme. Um, there was a point in his life when when everything was looking. I'm sorry, my audio kicked out there for a quick second. But as I was saying, at, at this point in his life, everything was looking up and was looking good. He was in the pharmacy program at Temple and had a girlfriend for 2 years. But these two things ended fairly quickly. This is because he dropped out of the Temple program after only a few months, and he broke up with his girlfriend. The main reason why he broke up with his girlfriend was because he was actually homosexual, but he closeted this because at the time it wasn't like illegal or anything to be homosexual, but it was considered like extremely socially unacceptable. And this was one of the things that he was always worried about because he believed that people always knew and talked about this behind his back. And really, after this like good period in his life, um, nothing really looked good after this, and everything started to slowly go downhill. And like all these worries that he had, it really started to pile up to a boiling point, which eventually leads to what we're talking about, which is this main shooting. Um, some other odd things I found about him was in the apartment that he lived in, his his entire apartment walls were like covered in things such as pistols, bayonets, like machetes. He had like a bunch of these ashtrays that were around his house made of like German shells. He had like a German artillery shell in like his living room. And in his basement he even had this like set up target range where he practiced shooting, eh, but it had like a really low ceiling, so he'd have to like lay down or like shoot from like his knees, and which I just found extremely odd. But his one main thing was his prized Nazi Luger that he brought back as a souvenir of the war. And this was the main thing that he liked to shoot with. Um, with all these weapons really and his mental health becoming more and more unstable, it just was really an awful mix. Um, it's because he started getting anger and anger at the world slowly, and he would get mad at like some everyday things, and he began to go through like make a list of all these things that would upset him, kind of like a list of people that like slighted him, and these were both like real things and things that he like thought people did, so they were like imagined things. um he Some of these were like Mr. Unruh, he really believed that this Mr. Cohen shortchanged him about 5 different times. And then there was also a time when Mr. Cohen told him to turn down his music, but the other neighbors were free for their son to play their trumpet. So I don't know why that really made him mad for some reason. Um, his list was really of his neighbors that slighted him in ways around the neighborhood that really made him mad. And the other neighbors on his list included a man and woman who lived below him who threw a bunch of trash on his apartment lot, a barber who put dirt in his vacant yard and packed up his drainage, um, a shoemaker who buried trash to his property, and some mystery boy named Sorg who tapped into his electricity to light up a Christmas tree. I don't know why, but he had like this is what I'm saying. It was very obvious that his mental state was becoming more and more slowly unstable because he would take these things way out of proportion what they actually were. Um, and his paranoia, even went back to his job at Kramer Hill, where it was turning into like this sort of, I don't know how you could say, like persecution complex. It's because he felt like everybody was insulting him, or but the main problem was, as I said before, was that he was worried that everybody believed that he was a homosexual, which he was, but he was afraid that people would know this because it was obviously unacceptable at this time. And he thought at one point Mr. Cohen called him a queer, which really upset him, and that he was spreading this around, and that other people would start to call him this eventually. So it just really upset him. And the night before the shooting, um, he was supposed to go on a date to watch this movie with another man that he was having an affair with for that entire week. But he got held up in traffic and was unable to reach the theater at the time, which was a well-known gay pickup spot. Um, so he sat in the dark for 2:20 until like 2:20 a.m. since he was obviously way too late, and his date already left. So he just watched multiple screens on loop until 3 a.m. But then at 3 a.m. he got back to his home and he saw that the newly constructed fence at the rear of his backyard, that the Cohens put up, who lived next door. They were these drugstore owners next to him, and he believed that they tampered with this gate that he had back there and messed it up, and this was really the last straw for him for some reason. Um, and apparently for a couple years after the police found out, he was actually contemplating on killing several of his neighbors over like petty things for many years. These were like those squabbles, slights, name calling, which all really fed into this psychotic like state that he was starting to go into. And he really started to believe like the world was more and more out to get him. So he decided to enact his revenge in this shooting. This is where he, jeez, this was so around like 8 a.m. His mom was trying to find him for breakfast, but couldn't find him at all, and she was very worried about this. But then she finally realized what was going on after she started hearing shooting. This is because a little bit before this, Unruh went up to collect his Luger and ammo for it, his 6-inch knife, tear gas pen with 6 shells. Um, yeah, and he cut through the backyard. And excuse me for a second. I need to grab a drink of water. He then went through his backyard and dressed in this tropical suit, white shirt, striped tie, and army boots, and he shot at a delivery man in his truck. He ended up missing. He then walked into the shoemaker store without saying a word, and he shot John Pilarch. I'm sorry if I butcher any of these names. Some of them have weird last names. Um, who was a 27-year-old shoemaker who was on one of his list of people that slighted him. Um, he fell to the floor, but he was still alive, so then he shot him in the head again, killing him. Um, he then walked out back into the street, and he entered the barbershop next door, which was where Mr. Hoover, 33, was cutting hair, and Orr Smith, who was 6, was out front of one of those carousel style horses, and the, the barber jumped out in front of the child trying to protect him, but Unruh killed the boy, shooting him in the head, and shot again with the shot that would end Hoover's life. Um, he ignored um, Catherine, who was Orr Smith's mom, who was who cared. I'm sorry, my mic cut out again. For some reason, I'm having mic difficulties. Um, yeah, but she then ran out to the street with her child in arms, obviously screaming, upset. Um, she then um, got put into a car and they sped away, taking the kid to the hospital. Then, then Unruh went into the on back of River Road and shot a boy in a window. He missed, and he fired at a tavern across the street that was owned by Frank Engel. And I'm sorry, my mic cut out again. But then there was James Hutton, who came out of the drugstore to see what all the shooting and commotion was about. Obviously, um, he was then shot, and then he saw Maurice, 40, and his wife Rose upstairs in their apartment. Unruh shot 3 times through the door before firing one more, shooting her in the head. And he saw Maurice's mother, Minnie, trying to call the cops and shot her multiple times. And then he shot Maurice off the porch roof, making him fall into the pavement. And Maurice Cohen was dead on the sidewalk. Unruh then continued his rampage. He then continued his rampage back onto River Road. He then shot 4 people driving in their cars, just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He then saw another car and shot at it, killing the driver and the passenger in the front seat and wounding their son, which was in the back, by shooting him in the neck. Um, he then headed into a barber shop where he found a woman begging for her life, and then he shot her in the head at close range. He then shot a 3-year-old boy who was playing in the curtains, mistaking him for somebody else, which tragically killed him. Then, on his way back to his apartment, he saw a mother and son, and he was starting to run out of ammo, and he shot and wounded both of them. And then, since he was out of ammo, he headed back into his apartment, ending his rampage. So, in total, in around 20 minutes, Howard Unruh killed 12 people and severely wounded 4, but later this toll would go up to 13 because that 9-year-old passenger that he shot that was in the back of that one car um, later died at the hospital. Alright, once in his apartment, um, there was really no like protocol for how police would deal with this type of issue, since mass shootings at this time weren't really as common as they are today. So there were a bunch of neighbors outside just going around seeing what was going on, and while 50 officers surrounded the 2-story building and began shooting at it with machine guns, shotguns, pistols, whatever they had, even though there were some kind of a crowd of like around 1,000 people that were in the line of file. During this, there were bullets fired at this apartment for a few minutes, and eventually, a reporter decided to randomly call his house phone, and he actually answered the phone during the bullets obviously pouring everywhere. During this, the reporter asked him like a few questions. The only ones that I have in quotes that he actually responded to was he asked how many people he killed, and he replied that I don't know yet, I haven't counted them, but it looks like a pretty good score. And then the reporter followed up asking him why he was killing, and Unruh said he didn't know, but he had to go because a couple of friends were coming to get him soon. Then police went on the top of the roof, threw tear gas into the house, and demanded for him to surrender, which he then did, leaving his weapon inside the house and going out the back door. Police were obviously extremely mad, and they asked him if he was psycho, and in quotes he replied, "I'm not psycho, I have a good mind." Then after the shooting, it was noticed that Unruh was shot in the back of his buttocks by Frank Engel from an upstairs window. So then he was rushed to Cooper Hospital like the rest of his victims were. But the surgeons were unable to remove the bullet from his butt, so then he was considered to be criminally insane, and he was transferred to Trenton Psychiatric Hospital voluntarily, where he would remain for the next 60 years, as his case would never stand trial. He had no remorse for any of the crimes that he committed, and he did say, though, that crime is a sin, so he thought that he should personally end up getting the electric chair. He was then diagnosed with all sorts of things like schizophrenia for some reason, even though he had no signs of or symptoms of actually having schizophrenia, and he was signed with a he was diagnosed with a bunch of other random things that he didn't have, and he was considered unable to stand trial. Occasionally, some things would randomly come up about this trial, but nothing ever would come up about it, and he would then go on to spend the rest of his life in a mental hospital until in '93 he was transferred to a less restrictive geriatric unit where he would live out the rest of his days. He then died on October 19th, 2009 at the age of 88. And that is really what mainly happened in this whole killing. I really found it crazy after the details that he really just went around his neighborhood shooting people that he believed slighted him for some reason. And I don't know, my mind's still really blown about it after learning about all these details of how he would just walk around and he would just start randomly shooting his neighbors or shooting whoever he thought was against him or possibly slighted him in one way or another. And this walk of death, I don't know why it's really not talked about more, because I feel like this is just another one of those forgotten stories that should be told more, because this was one of our first like major like shootings, and it's one that happened like fairly close to us, since it's only like what 2 hours away, but it's still like fairly close, and this should be more of a big deal and a little bit more talked about, because he just walked around for 20 minutes killing 13 people, even like a 3-year-old at one point, which is just completely absurd with his little Luger that he brought back from World War II. I just, I don't know, I'm still pretty shocked about this case, and I thought it was fairly interesting. I hope that you found it interesting as well, and that's really it. Thank you for listening to my little spiel about in this little podcast about the Walk of Death, which was a tragic incident, and I hope that you have a great day. Thank you.